feet, stomping out the negativity. Everybody not a friend of me. Spread the love, still I move deliberately. Bully face on, but the smile be heavenly. Brooklyn girls, so they love the energy, love sincerity. So I take the liberty to take them on a journey lyrically through hallways and alleys.
And thank you for joining another episode of The Next Chapter, where we discuss shades of gray. I am one of your co-hosts, Minister Kat, a.k.a. Kitty Rose. But as you can see, I'm by myself right now. Melissa D is not available this week to shoot with us. I think I must have weared her out for our last week in-person taping of The Next Chapter. But guess what I have for you today? I have another in-person taping, and we have a male perspective this week and a fellow co-host, a fellow BronxNet producer, a fellow friend, a fellow parent, a fellow. Everyone, for those that don't know, I got my man Hosea Givan in the building today. Let's welcome him in.
Thank you, sister.
Hosea, how you doing?
I'm good. Good to be back in this kind of situation.
Who you telling?
Oh, man, I missed it.
Man, I have too, but I'm glad that I've been still able to watch you. I didn't know that you were still necessarily programming on television, but I did kind of catch some stuff, so I just assumed that you was doing it on via YouTube. But it's good to know that you actually didn't really skip a beat during COVID.
Yeah, I tried to keep it going, but it wasn't easy.
Man.
I tried to keep it going. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I'm glad that you're joining us today.
Glad to be here.
It's divine because I thought about you when it came to taping this show, but I thought you was too much of a square to have this
why you keep saying that? Oh, man.
Because today's topic, you guys, is one that we're actually going to do into two parts because this topic is too serious for us to kind of just shrug into one 29-minute show. You know, as I am going through these next chapters in my life, you know, I'm also coming into the point of understanding. And today's topic of the week is talking about sexual trauma. Sexual trauma, and particularly when it comes to our men. Now, all I know is my black man, but I feel like, you know, it could be a layer to men in general. So I'm so grateful that we actually have a male perspective today to talk about sexual trauma that maybe he might not have dealt with himself, but may be familiar with. And I think the word trauma gets lost because we almost automatically think of something violent, when trauma can just be the way something happened to us in our youth or during our dating life in our 20s that plays a part into our behavior as adults when it comes to dating, marriage, and sex, you know. So let me just give a little backup to, you know, our audience. I was having this conversation on another show I was on, but again, because I'm going through my next chapter, you know, the brother I'm dating is 60 years old. And he's in realization of where he's at and who he is, and understanding some things of that his childhood played a part with, and now his adult behavior. But me as a woman, you know, black women, we hear the stories, we hear, you know, what you guys got to go through, but because we got our own stuff, we tie it. We don't want to hear about your stuff unless you're actually doing the work. But then what does that look like when now you come into a place of understanding, where now you're dealing with a man who maybe not in his own understanding of things yet, or just now coming to his understanding, where you want him to change something of a behavior that he's been doing, let's say, for 50 some odd years, and recently becoming to this awakening at this age of 50 something or 60 something because of something you've never even thought about that affected you at your childhood, like losing your virginity in ages such as like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you know, under 13 from that babysitter, that auntie, you know what I'm saying?
You know, it's funny. This is something that I was just researching just yesterday.
Really?
This very topic.
You see how divine?
It's crazy.
Ooh.
It's crazy. And so you just don't, you know, and it's something that I had never really considered. You know, I think that in my case, I was 16, you know, so I wasn't a kid, and it was something that I kind of orchestrated or helped to orchestrate. It was a mutual thing. It was a mutual thing.
Okay.
So you know, but as a guidance counselor, you know, I was a guidance counselor in the school system for so long. You know, they train you to see signs of issues with young people, and, you know, when they're withdrawn. So as a guidance counselor, I did encounter some of that.
Okay.
You know, male and female.
Okay.
Male and female. But I do think it's something that we do not talk about as much as we should, and it goes back a long way. Now we're talking about these types of relationships, but imagine when we were enslaved.
Okay.
And the amount of sexual trauma that existed back then, and what they always talk about women being raped, right? They never talk about what may have been happening to the men, how they
that
may
did
have been.
happen.
Well,
Right.
it absolutely happened.
Right.
It absolutely happened. So, you know, as we look at fast forward 150, 200 years later, and we see a lot of the social unrest and a lot of the anger and a lot of the tension has probably been passed down from generation to generation, stemming from some of those types of experiences back in the day. We need to begin to have some opened up conversations and dialogue about those types of traumas. Because for men, you don't want to ever say you've been the subject of being molested or taken advantage of sexually or even physically hit. Imagine, you know, a man that's being physically abused by his. That's not something we would talk about.
And we're not. We almost put it like a pound on your shoulder. You know what I'm saying? We don't even look at something that could be actually not right. You know, we don't always think that when a boy loses his virginity at such a young age that actually is something bad. But this is the video that stuck out in my mind in my research that I wanted to bring to kind of talk about what the after effects could be. Always like a bad effect. Sometimes things could just, because of what happened, affect how we behave as adults, you know, and how some things that we may or may not do sexually because of certain things that turned us off very early. I know for me, again, one of the things that came up in this conversation was the disconnect sometimes I felt or I see men have to sex, or the disconnect to adultery or cheating because, you know, the woman did nothing wrong. There's nothing even bad in the relationship, but because there's emotionalist, am I saying that right? The emotion is taken out of the act because it happened so young that they might not even understand the value yet of sex and intimacy that comes with that because they haven't learned that tool. Especially another example, if you grew up in a household where your father, you know, necessarily because of stuff that we just talked about, passed, and he's not the most affectionate with your mother or most emotional with your mother, loves your mother, but his job is to go home, go to work, take care of the bills. That's how he shows his affection, his love. But the child who happens to be a boy in the house, or even a girl, but boys, since we're talking about men, don't get to see emotion. So how does that not trickle down or cause some type of trauma in the way that he now relates to women?
You know what I found interesting about that video? So he kind of joked about it. You know, he kind of laughed it off. If that was a female in that same position, she would not have been expressing that experience the same way. So, you know, that's a clear distinction between a male and a female, because a male, even in that situation, 11-year-old boy that's being raped by a 30-year-old woman
who thought that his mother wasn't taking care of him.
That's straight up rape, right? That's straight up rape. So there's clearly trauma, but he didn't even, in my opinion, he didn't effectively convey the depth of the damage. Right. He just talked about he can't go down on a female, but psychologically and emotionally, you know that had to mess him up.
But not only did we know that it had to mess it up, his way, possibly we don't know, of dealing with it is through his comedy, is making light of it.
And I thought of that.
You know what I'm saying?
I thought of that,
so,
yeah.
you know, we took a minute, 2 minutes out of a, 30-minute interview. You know what I'm saying? That was done. And I'm sure there's been on other platforms, because I don't know if this is the first time I actually heard about that. I know he's also involved in polyamorous relationships. Who knows how that affected how he now lives as an adult with the way he lives with women. But it's also, you can't, like you say, you can't say that it doesn't stem from something. Like he didn't just wake up and say, all right, this is how I'm now going to live my life. You know, it came from what affected him or what was done to him, or what wasn't talked about because it was you know what I'm saying? Or because, like he said, you know, his mother was into some things. What that mean?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? What that means is that your mama wasn't around.
Right.
Your mama wasn't paying attention to those elements. And again, that easily could so happen because sometimes in parenting, you know, you ask your child what's going on and he'll be like, nothing. And then you, out of respect for him, not wanting to push, you let it be. But you, in your mind, did your part. I asked him if he was okay. You know what I'm saying? So because now we're trying to be friends and not trying to be pushy, we don't pry. We don't sit. I was just watching The Shy on the first episode, and the father was trying to talk to his daughter. And the daughter was in her mood and her feelings, and she was like, I don't really feel like talking. And he could have did like most parents, okay, when you're ready. But what he said to her was, I don't just want to have the parent-child relationship. I want to have a real relationship with you where we talk so that when you leave this house as an adult, you want to talk to me not because I'm just your dad, because you have a bond with me. And sometimes I think we as parents kind of forget that we got to push.
Oh, no question.
You know what I'm saying? Because then she ended up opening up and talking to him and then got some kind of maybe not solution, but resolution and another perspective of thinking about something. So we as parents, we may not want to be pushy, but you have to talk to your sons and figure out, like when my son was going to college, my main issue wasn't his father talking to him about, you know, use protection. I wanted his father to have the conversation of what life is now to college when the ratio of girls is 12 to 1. And now, you know, you was already getting girls in high school. So now what's that going to look like? You're in college and you got 10 chicks over here, you know, girls from different cultures. What does that look like? How do you pay attention to their emotions? How do you not, you know, take advantage of them because you got sex that's crazy right now coming at you from all different types of different personalities. You got chicks want to do your laundry. You got chicks want to come in, clean your clothes. Some chicks don't want nothing. Some chicks want to marry you. How do you now navigate that as a young 18-year-old boy fresh out of high school?
And they're learning so much about sex through pornography, right? So when you
pornography ain't even porn. Pornography just these damn videos that they show. TV.
But if you take it to that level, they don't really have a true sense of the intimacy and emotional component that is so vital to, because everything is all about the physical.
All
right?
about the physical.
So we got to basically, to your point, definitely take a little more time in understanding that there's that emotional piece that you never talk to. I'm going to take myself as an example. My father, when I first got married, you can mold her. That was the extent. That was the extent of his advice. You can mold her, right? None of the. You have to be supportive.
Did he give that same information to your brother?
I don't know.
Okay.
I can only speak for me, and I was the first one to take the plunge.
Wow.
So,
How did you feel that affected you when you were trying to learn and navigate being a husband?
Well, you know. See, my father's generation and my generation, there was in between that time was the women's movement, right? So women were a lot more liberated and outspoken in my generation opposed to my dad. But my dad is passing on the values that he learned in his generation, right? So I had to it was like an on-the-job training kind of thing. You know, I didn't get it from my dad because the women were different in my dad's generation. And things changed from his generation to my generation. Was
there any time a little resentment? Not I'm mad, but kind of like, yo, dad, for real?
I don't blame him because the world changed and women changed. Okay. You know, so he grew up in a certain time where men could kind of, you know, it was free for all pretty much, and it was accepted and understood. But during the women's liberation movement, we ain't going for that anymore. No, you need to check yourself. That was more so in my generation than in my father's generation.
How influential was your wife then in her assisting in you in understanding how you can relate better to her?
Well, it ended in divorce.
Oh, but I'm bummed. Okay.
So, you know, there was many things that contributed to that.
Right.
But
I could see
that that didn't help. That certainly didn't help. Because again, women were changing. They weren't accepting what their mothers accepted, right?
Okay, but as women were changing, what have you noticed that didn't change with men in the way that they communicated? Because even though now you're saying that the generations have changed, now you're in a generation where, you're around a village of men who communicate and support each other differently than maybe the village that your father had. You're in fraternities, you're in community organizations, you're about healing and having those uneasy conversations with your fellow men. I'm not saying you're having these kinds of conversations, but the development of conversation is a lot different than what your father has. How has that been instrumental in being the man who you are becoming or are?
Well, yeah, I do think that as of this current situation, this current generation, we are finding that it's easier to be more open and genuine and true. Sharing your thoughts and your feelings is definitely more prevalent now, and I'm thankful for that. And I think the world is going to be a better place as a result of the fact that we have men that are more open, more sensitive. From what I see, I'm looking at this next generation coming up. They're less chauvinistic.
Okay.
Definitely more open-minded, washing the dishes and doing the housework. That I had to figure that out. I had to figure it out. But these cats know it. They know that this is how it's going to be. But I had to figure it out. But I'm still working toward it.
Okay,
I'm not 100% there yet, but I'm getting there. I'm a lot better than I was.
Amen.
For sure.
On that note, let's go to our PSAs.
Honey, what I think you need is a socket wrench.
I played JV basketball.
I'm sorry. I don't think it looks right.
This is good, and it's all good, baby.
Is it really all good?
If you love me enough to routinely test your handyman skills, not to mention the strength of your marriage, then of course you'll visit nhtsa.gov/therightseat to make sure I'm in the right car seat.
I'm gonna call my dad.
When I was growing up, my mom was extremely tidy. We were trained to put things back where we got them from. One day, when I walked into my mom's house, I felt like I walked to someone else's house. There was stuff everywhere. And just growing up the way I grew up and to see this transition was very alarming.
When Sean talked to me, it was a wake-up call, and that's when I went to the doctor.
So I wanted to bring back a comment or a note that my brother actually texted me in regards to this subject. So he goes, because I actually invited him to give his feedback or perspective on this topic. So he goes, "That's funny because R. Kelly's voice just blew through my speaker as I was getting out the shower. Your mind's telling me no, but your body. And I rushed to change to the next song. Ironically, when that song came out, I was sleeping with a 27-year-old and a 36-year-old woman while I was only 16 years old. It wasn't until I was 44 that I realized that I was sexually taken advantage of. Having sex to a song that was written by a man who was sexually taking advantage of the person he wrote that song for, irony at its best. That song is a trigger. So that song is a trigger to my trauma. And even if I wasn't, I will always make a moral choice to be mindful of the entertainment that morally corrupts the spirit." So when I said that, I thought about, again, this next generation of being more mindful, of being more aware. I think, we are being more mindful and accountable, hopefully, to what we listen to on our home and what we share on our screens, that our children will be more mindful to how they interact with each other. Even though I think that television still is a part of the problem in the matrix of showing, the Sodom and Gomorrah way of living. And that's actually, to me, what our children see
that's
more
how
often.
They learn that way,
But
unfortunately.
I feel because of how liberal these shows are,
that it's giving them a more open way of thinking things than rather being stuck. So it's almost like a catch-22, which is where the guidelines of the parents still comes into, because as we learn, then we have to be able to have these conversations with our children so that they know what to look for in their own behaviors, you know. But if it's something that, you know, we kind of, like I said, dismiss because it happens at 16, you know, like, you know, when my children who are now 18, going on 19, started having sex, you know, it was imperative that my daughter's boyfriend, you know, parents and I sat down, or his parents sat down with him and talked about the emotional component to now what's involved in him entering a sexual relationship. It wasn't just make sure that you and Isha, I'm not supposed to say my daughter's name, but everybody already know who she is, make sure that you and Isha are not just, you know, protecting yourselves, but this is, you know, be mindful to her and cater to her, and but don't take advantage and don't allow her and that. So it wasn't so much that she was getting this feedback, he was getting this feedback, you know, from both his parents, probably more from his mama, but both parents were still there, where he got to not only get the information, but visually get to see how his father engages with his mother.
That's new age.
Yeah.
That is definitely new age. That is not something that took place in my generation, for sure. And that's something that needs to happen.
Okay.
You know, and I applaud you.
And believe me, we don't want to have the conversation.
But you're doing what you need to do.
Right.
You know, and I think that's important. And the fact that there's a partnership, not just with, you know, the two involved,
right,
but with the families involved.
Right.
And that's special. You know, so you doing your thing, girl.
But girl, we be sick to our stomach. You know what I'm saying? As we're having the conversation, but we know the need for it. We also know the need for it because, again, you made a stereotype, but it's not a stereotype of women do more of the communicating. I found another video that actually touched on that. Let's go to it.
Okay.
Why do men struggle to be emotionally available? Well, there's a few factors playing a part that challenge men when it comes to sharing their emotions. Firstly, there's their evolutionary brain. Now, men in tribes were taught not to show emotions, especially negative or weak emotions, because the tribe would lose faith in them if they did. Men learned that if they were worried or anxious, that they process those emotions internally and then come back to the tribe with a confident answer. You see, if a man's tribe lost faith in him, then he wouldn't have much of a tribe, whereas this wasn't such an issue for evolutionary women. Now, as it is, even with that, men also grow up being told by fathers often not to show emotions, or that it's not manly to show emotions. And not only that, they get a lot less practice. As a woman, you tend to talk to your girlfriends about how you feel, and you get good at communicating how you feel and recognizing how you feel. Whereas a lot of men don't do that at all. So not only do they have brains that aren't as wired to doing that, but they don't get a lot of practice with their buddies. And as if all those factors weren't enough, if the guy's had some sort of trauma on top of that, say he lost someone who was very close to him and that emotionally scarred him, or if he's had a very bad breakup or previous experience in past relationship or relationships, that's going to make the guy even less wanting to open up about emotions. Now, all these are reasons, but they're not excuses, and that's important to understand.
So as he mentioned, they are reasons, not excuses. So just because we came up in a household that wasn't as communicative, because that's just wasn't the generation. Now do you mind I ask, how old are you?
60.
At 60, you know, do you find that you're still learning about the things that you do or the things that you behave or even how you interact with your wife or women now, like in the last few years? Have there been any new, like, oh, I didn't know that about myself, Hosea?
See, now, you know, as I told you, I was a guidance counselor, right?
All right.
So I went through a counseling program. And one of the things, when you go through a counseling program, you kind of have to kind of work through issues throughout your life so you can be more effective helping other people. You want to make sure you sort out some of those issues that may be issues in terms of you being able to effectively help other people, right?
Right.
So I had that experience.
Okay.
And because I did have that experience, and then I was that guy in my crew. We can talk. We talked about, well, growing up, we talked.
Okay.
We talked. So I did have, throughout my life, I don't like to hold things, you know. I like to be able to talk it out, and I always had people that I could do that with. So that's a blessing.
Right.
You know, and I realize
and that's
everybody
probably why
doesn't
you
have
said
it.
that you don't really have that trauma because you had these opportunities that throughout your life to kind of be guided.
I was fortunate.
Amen.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so it does work.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
See?
Absolutely. It definitely, you're more balanced. And you go talking about the affection. My parents weren't affectionate when I was a child growing up.
Okay.
They wanted to say they weren't ones to say I love you or weren't affectionate. But as they got older and they have grandchildren, you start to see it. But I can say for me, I was always, I guess, gravitating toward people who were affectionate because that was lacking within my own situation, and I've always been affectionate. So, I think that I've been pretty comfortable with how I, interact.
Well, on that note, we are going to go into part 2 where we're actually going to bring in another perspective of actually what ignited or started this conversation. But the one thing I want to say before going to that next session is I love the fact that this is evidence. This is not, I might have thought he was corny, but y'all can see he's a good looking man. So the fact that, bright, unfortunately vain, but good looking and bright, shows that with the right types of communication very early on, what the results can be.
Crazy.
He didn't know where I was going with that.
I didn't. Thank you for the compliment, though.
So on that note, we're going to come back next week with the part 2 of this conversation because once again, we are the next chapter where we discuss shades of gray. So I'm not going to give you that whole follow, share, all of that stuff because we're going to come right back next week, same time, same channel, or you can find us on YouTube. Stay tuned for part 2 of sexual trauma and the effects on our men from the next chapter with your girl, Minister Cat, a.k.a. Kitty Rose. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Next Chapter where we discuss shades of gray. I am one of your hosts, Minister Cat, aka Kitty Rose, and as you can see, I'm back again by myself only for a little while because I'm back with our co-host from last week, Hosea Givan, with an additional special guest that we're going to Skype in just a few minutes. But I couldn't leave you with just what we left off with last week, talking about sexual trauma and sexual trauma with men. That was our topic of the week last week, and I wanted to give due diligence to that topic again. So I'm back again this week with Hosea. We're still on the same set. We didn't have to change clothes because it was like we're just going to pick up from where we was talking. One of the things that we talked about, which I love, that Hosea's story is not necessarily one of a bad one. You know what I mean? It's actually one we need to hear more of in regards to having a village that you can kind of communicate with and explore life experiments or questions that you might have as you're going through this. You also mentioned that I'm going to say first marriage, because you mentioned your marriage didn't work or wasn't as successful as you would like it to be your first going round. But I happen to know that you are married now, so that obviously wasn't the first marriage. What did you learn that carried over to your second marriage to be hopefully more productive or more successful in you guys communicating with each other to understand what you need to do as a husband or as a man in this new dynamic?
So go back to what my dad told me.
Okay. What was that again?
She's
can
moldable.
mold, right?
You can mold her, right? So that was the first thing, right?
Okay.
So that means I'm not looking at the final product. I'm in my mind thinking that I have to develop. Back.
Okay.
I have to look. There's a developmental part.
Okay.
Right.
Yes.
But that developmental part may never come. That person may never evolve into who you want her to be.
Okay.
Right. So when you get involved in a long-term relationship, when you step on that altar and make those vows, you should be looking at that person that you want to spend the rest of your life with at that moment.
Okay.
You understand what I'm saying?
I do.
Not who she may
Right.
evolve into. She's got to be that person now.
Yes.
So that's the one thing that I honestly feel was the difference.
Okay. Who helped you put that in your ear? Did you come to that Jesus moment on your own?
Tired of suffering. Tired of going through the anguish. So people gravitated to me because they wanted healing, right?
Okay.
And they wanted to be made whole.
Right.
But in that process, it caused pain for both, right? So I'm not, and there's a part of me that wants to fix and help, right? So when you coming into a relationship with that perspective, it's not always going to work out, because it may, you trying to fix, and it may not ever come together the way you wanted, and then they start to feel less than. I mean, it was complicated. So you want to hopefully see that person that you want to spend the rest of your life with in the moment that you're making those vows, not what they could be.
How did the village of men, or did you have a village of men to help you become more aware? Because you're in a fraternity, you're in organizations, community organizations, you're in things that supposedly uplift the community. How has these organizations or affiliates uplift you individually?
Well, the good thing is I have older brothers that I can talk to.
Okay.
And I was able to consult and confide in and get direction and support from some of those older brothers that are in my fraternity that gave me insight and direction that my father didn't give me.
Okay.
Right. So I was blessed with that guidance and that kind of support. So I did get some insight that I felt did help me in terms of just the selection process and just coming to the understanding that I evolved into, like, you can't fix people. You got to accept people for what they are or who they are. And in that me saying that, it took me to, because if you know me, I'm a servant. I have a servant mentality. I have a servant spirit. So I want to help, and I want to help fix and build. But you can't always do that in your relationship, right? Because that could be crazy.
Well, you can't always do that in your relationship if you haven't started the work within yourself.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about that.
You know what I'm saying? But if you don't even know that there's work to be done within yourself, it's always easier to just want to be the fixer in the relationship to make her better, to make him better, not realizing that in order to make any person better, we have to also be an example of where we're at in our evolvement or thinking or understanding.
But I think back in the day, because of my mindset, I almost sought broken people. I think that was a part of that. And consequently, that was a recipe for me, a recipe for disaster. It just was.
So this conversation really started last Sunday because I was on a podcast with a young woman that I met named Pippa Hurst. And in our conversation that was supposed to just be for an hour, it went into 3 hours of us talking. And this was one of the things that we started talking about with regards to like trauma. Again, not necessarily trauma in a bad sense, but trauma that men might have gone through or that go through that are unaware or is aware but haven't quite figured out how to navigate through whatever is wrong in their relationships with themselves and then obviously in relationships with others, i.e. women in particular. So I wanted to bring her on just so that we could get another perspective outside of just ours, again, to kind of, why I started this conversation, how it ignited in her perspective as a white woman dealing with men, black and white, and what that feels like in her journey of healing herself and healing others. So let's bring back, Pippa Hurst once again via Skype. Everyone, yay, hey, Pippa.
Hi. What's up?
How are you?
How's it going? I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. This is new for me, having 3 people on. I'm so excited. But I don't know, were you hearing some of the conversation?
Threesome?
This is my first threesome.
First threesome?
Yeah. The square says that.
So she thought.
Have you been listening to the conversation?
I have, yes.
Did you take any notes? Do you have something you want to get right and interject? What about the whole, how has your experience as a 49-year-old woman dealt with dealing with men, especially now with the array of men that you get to talk to on a daily basis because of your podcast, but also how did you feel while we were in the midst of this conversation on Sunday?
In the midst of our conversation, I was thinking about all of the Black men of various ages, ranging from the early 20s to the mid to late 50s that I've been talking to over the course of this last little while on the podcast. I was thinking of some of the experiences they have shared in terms of their own traumas. And then something struck me in regards to the Catholic Church. And if you want to take it to a more white environment, the priests abusing the boys and how that has affected white men in particular for generations.
I agree, because it also was the stigma of, you know, you being touched as a little boy, you know, and you hiding that or repeating the predator behavior that happened to you as a child, that traumatic, or that was so dramatic to you that you end up subconsciously now repeating that. Unfortunately, I learned that watching Law and Order, Sexy V, you know, but it's even interesting how television kind of gives us insight to things that we're not even thinking about happens, because we do kind of like pat guys on the back. Like, I remember when I was teaching my daughter about, you know, be careful about those boys. Like when she was going to camp, watch out for the boys. I never sat and said, watch out for girls.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
But I think you raised a great subject, in that the Catholic Church and its impact on society and on men. And if you look at, let's look at the police force, and that's something that I think about all the time. A lot of those guys came through Irish Catholic parishes.
Okay.
Right?
Oh.
And so, and Italian as well, right? And so when you see some of the violence that's being projected onto, let's say, I'm talking, one of my recent guests was the father of Jacob Blake. Jacob Blake is the young man that was shot 7 times in the back in Wisconsin. He was one of my guests today,
wow,
the father.
Okay.
And so I often think of the trauma that these police officers may have encountered as altar boys, as a part of these parishes, and then unresolved, going into the police force, still dealing with that unresolved trauma, and sometimes it plays out in horrible ways.
And not only does sometimes it plays out, but it plays out in the work, and then they come home with it because they haven't quite learned how to dissect it. And it's not necessarily a part of the training that also comes in, that needs to come in with the job, because again, it's a topic that we're not talking about. We might deal with, you know, protection, stereotypes, things of that nature, but we're not necessarily delving into why you behave in such a manner. And if you did come up in those households where not necessarily abuse was like my father abused me type of thing, but if my father was cold, you know what I'm saying? And not because he didn't love me or emotion, because that's what he knows, because, you know, we're the protectors, then how does that not trickle down to your behavior and how you now live your life, and then what your boys, your children begin to see in the household? Because especially if you're in a service job, you're not taken away from helping and being kind and considerate, but then you almost turn it off at home, not realizing, because in your head, I'm this way in the community, you know what I'm saying? You're not thinking about, I still need to be this way at home. And now my wife unconsciously is nagging me, which is now making me leave the situation, go to the bar, possibly entertain a conversation with a woman who's just a listener. You know what I'm saying?
That's real.
And now you end up cheating on your wife.
Real. That is real.
Because the woman you paid for is listening to you and not nagging you.
That is real.
Let's go to our PSA on that note.
Jason, let's go see your room.
That's not right. How is it? Is it good?
We scored going to the playoffs.
I can't believe I missed that. Every time I'm buzzed, I spend too much time on my phone.
What? I should take your phone away.
No. I'll call for a ride. Wait, why does my face look like that?
I'm playing with these new face filters.
Okay, you know what? Yep, that's mine.
But I need that back.
No.
Kevin. So Pippa, I can. Us tourist people, we can overtalk. So, what's your thoughts? What's your feedback on what we just talked about?
Can I just share something that I just happened to stumble upon on social media by someone called the holistic psychologist holistic psychologist.
Do we got to give them credit?
I'm not sure.
All right, go ahead.
She says trauma isn't just about the event. It's about the beliefs created from the event.
Ooh.
When we experience a traumatic event, our brain immediately tries to make sense of what has happened to us. If we experience trauma and our family support system denies it happened, shames us, or leaves us to cope with it ourselves, we internalize false beliefs, such as, I brought this on myself, something is wrong with me, if I would be a good girl or boy, this wouldn't have happened, people who love me will always hurt me, I'm unlovable, I'll always be abandoned by people I care about. So that alone, if you can imagine bringing all of that into whatever relationships you have and those belief systems that obviously that other person isn't going to be fully aware of, that's why the work has to be done by the individual.
Right. But sometimes the individual is not even aware that they have to do the work.
Right.
Which is really where the problem is at.
That's square one.
So now so I'm asking you and I'm asking you, Pippa, so what do we do as women? Because if we're like, I started out this conversation last week by saying, and I was telling Pippa this on her show, like, Black women already feel like we're understanding. You know what I'm saying? And we already feel, and I'm gonna speak for myself, I'm at a place where I feel like I'm here for you. I support you. You know what I'm saying? I understand what you're going through. I understand what you've gone through. I'm here to, be that partner for you. But if you're unaware that you even have some stuff that you're disconnected to, you know what I mean? And all the women in your past have all been good women. But none of these women were like Kat, where she's, what age did you lose your virginity? And, did your mama, you know what I'm saying? If they're not asking those questions for you to even think about stuff like that, but now you begin to, how do we as women don't become so exhausted with now the work that it's going to take for you to figure out why you move, how you move, if you're just now getting this light bulb moment in your 50s? You know what I'm saying? Because that behavior that you are now accustomed to is not going to change overnight.
That's the challenge. That's a huge, huge challenge, and that's not an easy hurdle to overcome. I wish there was a quick fix for that. I'm going to tell you, that's the crux. That's the problem within our community. It's not just a male-female relationship thing. It's just the late development of our men, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, and it's for all the reasons that you have mentioned previously, but so much in terms of society that's been on us. So, that's $1 million question, and it's not a quick fix. It does take, for those of us who are less broken, because we're all broken to some degree, but for those of us who are less broken, it's incumbent upon us to somehow figure out a way to connect with these brothers that need additional guidance and support. Now, I've dedicated my life to that, so I know what I'm talking about. I'm aware that I've been blessed, so I have an obligation to bless others.
Amen.
So, we gotta, for those of us who have more of an inclination or have more of an ability to do so, we have to.
Amen.
And if we don't do
my
it,
brother's keeper.
We have to be that way. It's the only way.
Pippa, what's your experience with white men? Do you notice because we had the conversation, I don't really have a vast experience with white men and their trauma because I'm racist and I don't date white folks, but someone that's dated white men and Black men and had sexual relationships with both, do you see them being a different in regards to the fact that you have these kinds of conversations where they have to unveil their baggage in a sense?
No, it hasn't been until recently that I've started having these conversations with any of the men that I've had relationships with, or otherwise. So I don't really have a lot to say about that because I haven't really had these conversations. I think this is all very new. I think mental health is becoming much more acceptable in terms of a topic of discussion. especially among men. So I think it's still, I don't know, I can't speak to it, but it feels fairly new.
Did you go home and talk to Georgie afterwards about our conversation? What was his feedback, if any?
No, he is actually in conversation with his neighbor next door, who I had a conversation with yesterday, about his own trauma, and he's in his 40s, I believe, has 3 children, has become aware of how his own trauma is impacting his relationships with his children, and is now not only wanting to do the work to change that, but also wants to share it on a podcast of his own, where he's talking about his own trauma as a Black man. So I had my young friend Jerry share his trauma on my podcast, which will be an episode that's upcoming. 21 years old when I met him, grew up in the Bronx, had drug addicted parents. His mother died when he was a baby. And he goes on to tell me about all of these things that happened to him after that, including being in a psych ward for most of his teen years. Wow. And the mental health stuff that comes with that. But he is also, at 27 now, incredibly self-aware and doing the work, and wanting to help other people do the work as well.
And that's key. And that's key. But I want to say something about you being a racist. You're not a racist. You have a preference.
Okay.
And having a preference doesn't make you a racist.
Okay.
All right.
Well, my preference is not white folks.
Okay.
So that's the racist connection.
But you don't feel you're better than. You don't feel you're better than white people.
But I don't want to mix the races.
But that's that's a preference.
Okay.
That's
so I'll take that.
If you feel you're better than, or you're superior to.
There we go.
Racist.
And that's really what the whole racist definition, that type of attitude and thinking that I'm better than. Right. So thank you for that correction. Yes. Because I've been challenged.
Because I see how you interact with everybody, and it's always
and I'm
love.
loving. Yeah,
it's always love. So
no
it's
doubt.
all about
all right,
preference.
I'll take that. But the beautiful thing before we come to our Jesus moment was what she mentioned in regards to, Father, what did you just say in regards to the brother who lost his mother? That's another component. I saw on a show recently that a man admitted to one of his disconnect to being this emotional cat was the first love of his life he lost when he was like 5 or 6. His mother died. So your first love is your parent.
Absolutely.
So when you lost your mother due to, I think she was even a victim of drugs, you it's almost still a sense of abandonment, even though that person made a transition. Right. But in your space, you feel abandoned, so you never really want to give of yourself completely to someone because you don't want that feeling again to happen. But if you don't even know that you're feeling that way, it trickles down to your adult behavior in your relationships with folks. Right. So my Jesus moment, or my come to Jesus moment, was, about once again, how the devil will use things to disconnect us. And communication is huge. And because when we start to break down communication, it's hard things to talk about. But it's so uplifting because it takes that pressure now off of you. Absolutely. And allows you to be mentally free to have these kinds of relationships that are significant. Your relationships with each other, your relationships with your spouse, your relationships with your community. It allows us to take these barriers off that we don't even know we have because we're trying to be politically correct.
Right.
And not rock the boat, or not, have conversations that are uncomfortable because they're not manly.
Right.
What's your Jesus moment? What's your, from this conversation, is there anything that you feel like outside of, like you said, just doing your part and being like my brother's keeper, because this is the work that you're now in, the service work of helping and healing?
I just think it's just being more aware of how young men are being influenced sexually. It's really a lot of what they see, and we talked about pornography. I recently saw a TV program where the mother walked up on her son, who was high school, just about to go into college, and she hears some of the language and the way that he's expressing himself to the female, and she's taken aback. And she realizes after he left, she starts watching porn because she's an empty nester.
Okay.
And now she's seeing some of the ways in which he's been influenced. And so she tries to go back and explain to him after the fact that there's, how you should communicate, how you should talk. So I just think it's imperative as often as much as possible that we have those types of conversations where we have the opportunity or take the opportunity to share and talk about the importance of properly communicating and respecting and how to honor and cherish. Those are conversations we just don't have.
And how to honor and cherish ourselves when we're not when someone is not doing it for us, how we can learn to do that. Pippa, what's your Jesus moment? Did you get one? Did you get a Jesus moment?
Honestly, I just think it's about self-awareness and not being afraid. I think there's a big fear for a lot of people in terms of looking inwards and looking at ourselves, and that's what prevents us from doing the work.
Amen. That's what prevents us from doing the work. And if we are prevented from doing the work, then we're prevented from giving glory to God of how successful and peaceful life is when we become more aware. You know what I'm saying? And that's why the scriptures tell us, or not the scriptures, that's why that's that saying that the devil's a liar, because once, we have these examples of the devil trying to say to folks or trying to tell God that we don't serve him unless it's the good things that we get. So we stay in the goodness, or we stay in what looks good or what we think is good. But the hard conversation doesn't look good, doesn't feel good, so we stay away from that. But
sometimes you gotta go there.
But when we go there, hallelujah, it's so much more freeing, and then you can give that praise to God, because it's like, okay, now I understand. I'm not taking away from what happened to me. I'm not taking away from what I've learned, but guess what? I'm still learning. And because I'm still learning, I still have opportunity to make change, be better, love myself, and then in loving myself, loving anyone who I'm encountered with, relationship-wise, romantically, or just relationships-wise that we have to have with our children. Because these traumas supposedly don't just happen sexually or romantically with the people that we have relationships with. Pippa just ended on a great point, and you ended on a great point, even how we parent, how we engage with our children. And because we have to start with our children in order to really begin to heal, you know what I'm saying? That type of jewel that we just dropped to our audience was the best way, I think, to end. So on that note, I'm going to ask you guys to do what I don't like to ask you guys to do, but that's a part of what we are and the life we live. So please follow and share, because this is a community effort, and it takes all of us to help in the building. That saying, I am my sister's keeper, I am my brother's keeper, let's be accountable for that, because there might be things that we talked about on this show that ignited thought, but needed to have follow-up information or follow-up tools that you guys can add in the comments below when you see us on YouTube or when you see us air on public access TV. Share and send us a thought and what we can do to make these information better for you. So please don't forget to follow, and share. Once again, didn't I tell you this was going to be a show? We could not do it in half an hour.
The three bulls.
The three bulls, my first threesome. I think I popped my cherry. That was good, baby. This was one for the books, and I'm so glad that divinely God allowed me to bump into you, you know what I'm saying, being here at the studio so that we can be engaged in a conversation that doesn't necessarily look bad. You didn't come on the show and say, well, this happened to me and this. You came on the show and be like, yes, this is what happened and I've been blessed and now this is my duty forward. And that's a beautiful message because the world will also think that trauma always looks bad. And it necessarily doesn't. It just, it's different for everyone, and sometimes it's packaged all right.
Right. Oh, she's always coming at me. You crazy.
I know his wife might not like that part of the show, but it's all good. So once again, I appreciate you guys all for joining us. This is The Next Chapter. I am your host, Minister Kat, aka Kitty Rose, and this is where we discuss shades of gray. Stay tuned and come back next week to The Next Chapter. All right, guys.
Good job.
Peace. Thank you. Thank you, Pippa.
Bye, guys.
Legendary ciphers get the MCs in the jobs. The city never sleeps. Slept from 1 to 5 when COVID hit the block and we had to stay inside. Tough love is all I know, so be gentle with my soul. Learn to navigate winters with no coat. If you never been cold, you never been broke. Hustle 24/7 just to stay afloat. So New York, like dollar pizza in that cold shit. That Real life, break from the heart of the city. It's as hard as it gets. This that new